Hi, everyone, and welcome to KIPP DC's Engaging on the Issue series. My name is Kristen Jackson, Director of Development, and excited to be here with all of you today. Our Engage on the Issue series is an opportunity for us to connect with supporters, and today, the chance to highlight one of our key priorities from our 2025 strategic plan. How are KIPP DC and local leaders working together to elevate student and family voices? Before we hear from our speakers today, I just want to remind everyone that you are automatically muted in our video, and I highly encourage you to submit questions or comments in the chat box. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to KIPP DC's Managing Director of External Policy, Dr. Carlo Silbiger.
Thanks so much, Kristen. Hi, everyone. I'm Carlos Silbiger, as mentioned, and I'm a relatively new member of the KIPP DC team working on external policy. And I'm so excited to be here today, not only because I am excited to talk about the work that we're doing, but also because I have an amazing group of folks who you're seeing up on your screen, who are all leaders in the DC education field. And they're going to be joining us to talk about what I think is a really central issue facing our community, which is how do we ensure, as we're dealing with all of the many important issues around education, that we're elevating student and family voices, centralizing them, making sure that those voices are heard and appreciated. And so, as you can see, we have people who work in school systems, we have people who do organizing, we have people who are elected leaders, we have parents, we have students, all joining us for this conversation. And thank you all for joining us as well. So before we get to them, I want to just give you a little bit of information about KIPP DC's approach to external policy to sort of frame the conversation. And so the way that we envision external policy is making sure that the decisions that are made in the government sphere here in DC actually take into account the needs of the students and the families and the communities served by KIPP DC. And so in my role, I work to look at what's being passed at the policies that are being brought up. And then I help us to advocate on those policies, bring in the voices of stakeholders, and also work collaboratively with a lot of really important organizations in the community so that we can amplify those voices even more. So let me give you a few examples of how this looks in real life. And I'm going to give you three. Again, I've only been here a few months, so these are all relatively recent. But here are three areas where we've done just that. One of them is increasing access to mental health clinicians at our school sites. So the council had a hearing a few months ago that looked at the Department of Behavioral Health and the way that they're trying to expand mental health clinicians in our schools. Our team at KIPP DC looked through the policies that had been put in place by the Department of Behavioral Health, and were able to actually go to the council and testify, thanking them for that expansion and the additional funding, and sharing with them the impact that's had on our schools and on our communities, but also asking for the program to be expanded further because there are a lot of schools that still don't have access to that, and also to ease some of the clinician licensure issues that were getting in the way of hiring people as needed. And so that's one example of how we elevated the needs of our schools and communities with the council. Another one has to do with increasing access to reliable and affordable internet. This back in the fall, the council was considering a bill that would have made a sort of a citywide approach to this. It wouldn't necessarily have directed KIPP DC per se, but a lot of our students and their parents live in communities where access to safe or reliable and affordable internet is not necessarily the case. So we submitted testimony talking about how important this legislation is for our students and their families, and tried to make sure that the legislation would actually provide them with the reliable internet they need to be able to access their schoolwork. And gave them some examples of what we've done within our network. The third one is actually really timely because we're doing this on Monday with safe routes to school, the idea of traffic safety at school sites. My colleague Vanessa and I, who you'll meet in a moment, brought together a group of families. We talked to them about what they would need in order to make them feel comfortable with the drop off and pickup of their kids and getting their kids to school safely. We got a lot of valuable feedback from them. And on Monday, Vanessa will be going to the council to share the feedback we got from our families and how the council can really tailor the legislation to the needs at the school site. So those are just a few examples of the many ways that we do this. So at this point, the next step for us at KIPP DC is going to actually be creating a policy agenda. And what that means is instead of just looking at what the council is discussing or what the State Board of Education is discussing and going and sharing our viewpoint, asking our families, our students, our teachers for their points of view, we actually want to proactively create a policy agenda, identify what are the primary challenges facing our schools, what policy issues would actually help us to address those challenges, and then set some achievable goals for the next year. And then actually reach out proactively to elected officials and members of the administration to try to advocate for those things. And so that's sort of where we're going next. And as you'll see on the next slide, part of the process of getting ready for that is engaging stakeholders. So we are going to be meeting. We've already started meeting with doing some focus groups with students and families and school staff in order to get their feedback on this. We are going to be inviting some of our stakeholders to testify at council hearings, at State Board of Education meetings, so that they can share their viewpoints. And also we're working on engaging some of our partner organizations, and I've listed quite a few there, to make sure that those who are already leading this work are also able to participate in helping us to set this agenda. And so that's what's coming up next. And if there's anyone on here who would like to participate or give feedback as we're working on this policy agenda, I am absolutely all ears and would be thrilled to meet with you and hear your thoughts. So with that, a little bit of introduction. I'm going to get to the important part, which is to hear from our amazing panel on their take. And so I'm going to ask everyone as I call on you now, I'm going to ask maybe if you could just share a little bit about yourself, what brings you to this work, how you're connected to the work of family and student voice and education policy, and we'll take it from there. And we're going to start, as we always should, with our students. And so I'm going to ask Markaya Mathis, who's a student at KIPP DC's College Preparatory High School, to introduce herself and then talk a little bit about a time when you felt like your voice has been heard and included, and how that felt to you when that happened.
Hi, I'm Markaya Mathis. I'm an 11th grader at KIPP DC College Preparatory. My main focus here is to help with mental health for students across the world, to better mental health within our schools, and also with safe passage and a lot of things that I want to incorporate with mental health for my school. A time where I felt I was heard was when I met with the group of the Center of Inspired Teaching, and we talked about ways that teachers could impact students on mental health, questions they can ask them, how they can get closer. We met with the ranges of teachers from kindergarten to high school, and they talked about ways where they would like to be better in the classroom when it comes to just a comment, just to make their student feel like they're heard, and incorporate what we believe that should be used in the classroom, like taking classes or training about mental health, just to open our mindset about it. So that was one thing that we talked about with them. We use different coping ways, how to deal with different situations in a classroom, far as like a student breaking down or shutting down in class. So that was very important. I felt heard a lot in the group. It definitely made me happy to know that actually there's actual teachers out here who actually care and on demand when it comes to their children mental health, like they're their parent at school, which a lot of children do need, or seniors, from kids to even big kids.
That's great. And it must have felt amazing to be able to share on such an important issue and be heard. And did you see changes come after that conversation?
Yes, we met with the teacher a month later. We met from a teacher from Wyoming and California. And I remember she told us that she enforced it a day once a week. Maybe on Wednesday, she would just allow the classroom to just make up work. Or if they wanted to put their head down, or if they just felt like they needed somebody to talk to, she would come and she would talk to them so that way they felt heard. And that kind of made me happy because a lot of children do need that in the classroom.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your work on that important issue and also for sharing that with us. Let's turn now to Letitia Vinson, who's a parent within the KIPP DC community and also a member of PAVE. So again, if you could just give us a short introduction. And then my question for you is similar. I'd love to hear a little bit about a time where you felt your voice has been heard and included in policy conversations around schooling here in DC and how that felt for you.
Thank you for this opportunity. So I am a KIPP parent. I have been since pre-K 3. My kids are now 6th grade and 5th grade, so I've been there for a little bit. I've also been a part of KPO, which is KIPP Parents Organization, since pre-K 3. I've also been a part of the KIPP Parent Advisory Board since its inauguration. And I'm also a PAVE parent advocate for parents amplifying their voices in education. I felt heard when I realized that as a parent, we had power, whether it be through PAVE's advocacy throughout the city, talking to council members and State Board of Education about the issues, especially relating to COVID response and how we go back to school and how we have this wonderful opportunity to kind of make what was already wrong better instead of just trying to go back, being able to improve. And I think in your previous slide, it kind of highlighted on one of those being internet usage or having access to internet at home. I know that can impede a lot of children's ability to do their schoolwork or having even the devices. And so as a PAVE advocate, I would say that I also felt heard during Voice and Choice Week. We do it every year right before the budget releases. We just did it back in February, and we got an opportunity, whether it been in person before COVID or now virtually, to speak with council members and be able to express to them not just our initiatives, but the parents of the city. So we survey hundreds of parents throughout the city and say, these are the things that are most important to us. And then these are the stats that justify our support or our ask. And this year is about mental health, as well as resources, which again, KIPP is working on, which I'm glad to hear, and as well as OST or out of school time funding and resources. And so going to them, being able to express what it is that we need and why, and then to see the budget increase, to see that more collaboration and strategy is brought around those subjects is extremely elating. But as a KIPP parent, and specifically in the environment that I live and breathe every day with my babies, I really appreciated the opportunity to be on the parent advisory board, or for them to even see that there was a need for that, to be able to elevate the parental voice in their system and how they operate. And there was a time where they were planning their strategic plan for the next 5 years. And they asked us as a parent board to express to them how we felt about the priorities, what the priorities should be, how we should execute, how we should be involved, and what that would look like and feel like for the next 5 years. And so that was an amazing opportunity because, like in any organization, you want to be able to go to your key stakeholders for feedback and advice, because they're the ones who are usually executing and living and the experience of which you are introducing. And so I appreciated the opportunity to be able to have a say. And from that, we were able to see some changes in the way we communicated as a system, the way that we interacted with parents, and the way that we incorporated social emotional learning and restorative practices and such. So I really felt heard in those environments and in those situations.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing. It's great not only that that you are feeling heard when you're expressing your voice in those ways, but that you've done it at so many levels. And so everything from the school to state level elected officials are hearing from you and fellow parents. So thank you for sharing that. Let's turn now to Dr. Jessica Sutter, who's the president of the State Board of Education here in DC. And Dr. Sutter, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you see the DC system getting right when it comes to elevating the voices of students and families. What are we doing well? Where are we being successful?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today and for asking that question. So I'll toot the state board's horn for a few minutes, and I'm going to start with our work with students. So I think one of the things we get right is we listen to the student representatives. And in the last couple of years, we've done what they told us, and it's worked out beautifully. So when I joined the board in 2019, we had 2 student representatives, and one of them happened to live east of the river, which is where most of the students in the city live. In my 3rd year on the board, our student representatives came to us and said, we need more student voice on the board. We don't think 2 is enough. We think we should expand to 4. We also think that you have to require that at least one of the student reps at all times lives and goes to school east of the river, because it's an important voice that we need to make sure the board is hearing from. They also said to us, we'd like to make sure that when you pick folks to be on the board, because our student representatives are not elected, they apply, and then our student representatives who are currently on the board make recommendations to board members about who we should select. They said, you should think about this holistically. What voices are we missing from who's currently in our student representative group, so that we're not just picking someone who's qualified, but we're picking people who help complete the picture of student perspective. So right now, I'm pleased to say we have 4 fantastic student women who represent students on the Board of Education. We have 2 young women who attend public charter schools, 2 young women who attend DC public schools. Also, they are fantastic meeting facilitators. And I think we as the adult members of the board learn a lot from watching them facilitate their peers on the student advisory committee. So I think we're getting that right. But the other thing they said to us, which was so important, was every time you vote on a resolution, our vote doesn't count. We get to make a voice vote, but it doesn't actually count in whether the resolution is passed or not. And that's in law. So we could work towards getting that law changed. But in the meantime, we want to make a statement from the Student Advisory Committee about our stance on the resolution. And we'd like to read it before a vote is taken by the adults, so that you are considering our perspective as part of that. And so we do. And then finally, this year, one of our reps said, do students serve on committees? Could we? And we said, there's really no reason we couldn't. We'll have to make sure that the meeting times work for our students, but we'd love to have you on committees. So 2 of our student representatives joined standing committees in addition to the Student Advisory Committee, and we changed our bylaws to allow their votes to count in those committees. So before a matter comes before the board, it comes through our committees, and our student rep voices count there. So I can't take any credit for that. This is what our students told us we needed to do, and we listened and we did it. So I think that's a thing we get right. When it comes to parents, I think the board is working to make sure that we more consistently and authentically engage the voices of parents. One thing I think we get right is we have a public meeting every month where any member of the public can sign up to testify. And we hear from PAVE parents a lot in those meetings. When we went into a virtual posture for the pandemic for our public meetings, we saw a 143% increase in the number of people who came to testify. And in 2021, of the 275 people who testified, 60 people were testifying for the first time. Many of those folks were parents. So I think one thing we get right is that we've actually stayed in a virtual posture for our public meeting so that we could maintain that broader opportunity for people to participate, because people are participating from home while they're cooking dinner or with a child on their lap. And that's something that would be much harder if it was only possible to testify in person. So I think those are things we get right. I would also be remiss if I didn't shout out our sister offices. The state board has 2 other offices that serve parents directly, the Office of the Ombudsman and the Office of the Student Advocate. And both of those offices do a lot of direct work, helping parents with issues they have at their LEAs or with other agencies in town that affect them and their students. And that work, I think, is work that we also try to get right, to make sure that our ombudsman's office and our student advocate's office are as accessible as possible to students and parents.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Sutter, for all that information. And one thing I'm taking away from all of that is the fact that you could name so many things that student board members suggested and then got implemented. That does not always happen. There's a lot of elected officials who have, students on there, but things don't change. And so amazing that you all were able and willing to make those changes and really make them feel heard. I'm going to bring in Vanessa Gerardo, who works for KIPP DC as our director of advocacy. And Vanessa, I'd be interested in hearing a little bit from you about, since you work in advocacy and organizing, what systems are there in place in the sort of DC charter sphere that help students and families be involved?
So, well, first let me say, I feel like there's probably some work to do there. There are probably more ways that need to be built out. But it is, I think that, it's a good area to work on. And for KIPP specifically, like, I feel like there's like a two-way street there that KIPP, for Carlo and I, we definitely have tried to build out a way in which we're providing opportunities for families and students to give feedback on specific issues. So like Carla was speaking about earlier in the presentation, and we're trying to make that kind of like to standardize that process and what that will look like and who gets invited, and making sure we're finding ways to reach the families that may not typically participate. We want to make sure that we're hitting and thinking about how to reach those families in our planning and in our process. But then the other way is obviously, families and students being able to initiate giving that feedback. I mean, we have families that obviously we do surveys and things like that, but, finding ways to ensure that they have a clear pathway to share whenever they have an experience or an issue or a conflict or a solution to a longstanding problem. We want to make sure that there are clear pathways for kids and for parents to share that. And so that's something that I know KIPP needs to, develop out a little bit more. And I think other charter schools as well, because we're also busy. So much is always happening all the time. But, we're really here to serve the students and the families and making sure that we're hearing them and not just getting caught up in what we deem to be important or we deem to be a priority. So I definitely feel like there's more work to do there, but at least for KIPP, it's a focus for Carlo and I to develop that out.
That's great. Yeah, I hear two really important things there that I just want to amplify. One being making sure that every voice is heard, not just the people who are generally the ones who come and participate. And obviously we love to hear those voices too, but sometimes that may skew a little bit if we don't think about what voices are still not in the room. And then also trying to take on the issues that are brought to us, not necessarily the ones that we see. So thank you for elevating those two things. And lastly, I'm going to bring on Frankie McDaniel, who is with the DC Charter Alliance, working on advocacy and organizing there. And I'm going to ask you a similar question to what I asked Vanessa, which is, since you do this work across the entire sector, what systems are there in place so that parents and students who want to be involved in this field are able to?
Yeah, like so many other people said, like, thanks for the opportunity. It's also nice to put some faces to names that I've been hearing a lot. But yes, I'm the director of organizing for the DC Charter School Alliance. And yeah, to answer this question, I think starting at the school level, a lot of our schools have school-based, family-focused programs ongoing. And so we've heard a little bit about parent advisory councils that KIPP offers. I know that other charter schools have similar programs. They have parent organizing groups. There are also, I think what's unique to this sector, and I've worked in other charter school sectors in other states, but what's unique to this one and something I'm really excited about is that parents also serve as board members for charter schools. And so that's also just a different level, a higher level of governance and leadership that we don't see in other schools. And so just the access to that level of leadership, I think is really exciting. Also that we see a lot of parent advocacy and student advocacy as part of schools' missions. And so to just see that like from at the foundational level of the school, too, that it's written to the like sort of the ethos of the school. In terms of like looking outward in terms of like systems, I think KIPP is a really good example. And I'm like happy to see that we have representation here on the panel. Like it's a really great example of parents putting their priorities first, and being able to, you know, do that outward external facing policy work. To Vanessa's point though, I do think that we still have a lot more to do in terms of how that information and those resources are accessible to families and students. There's a lot going on in DC, and there's a lot of resources available. It is the breeding ground of so many different advocacy. There's literally a group for every advocacy issue you can possibly think of here. And there are so many resources for trainings or how to do this sort of work. And they're just inaccessible to families and students for all sorts of reasons. You either just like literally physically can't get to the meetings. They're not translated. So they're just focused on English speakers, or they're just not advertised anywhere. And like, if I'm a parent or a student that just doesn't know, I'm never gonna know. And so like, unless I know to look for that. And that is a very small, like specific group of people in the city. And so I would just love to see as a sector, not just individual schools, but as a sector and really broadly the K-12 landscape in general, like how are we making that information accessible to parents and families? Like how are we encouraging that? How are we how are we making those spaces family friendly, especially for families who have never done that before and want to, and also just keeping in mind that parents and students organize already. They're already doing that. We don't see it, doesn't mean it's not happening. And so like, how do you do that like sort of outreach to just bring them more into the fold and like in those positions?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, I'm sure if you went to any school in the district, there's going to be parents getting together talking about what's needed, students getting together talking about what's needed. So how do we take those existing conversations and make sure they're being heard? That's a really great point. Thanks, Frankie. So I'm going to take a selfish moment here because I have all of you here, such incredibly knowledgeable set of people. And as I mentioned, we're starting the process of coming up with this policy agenda for the next year. What are those few items that like KIPP DC should be focusing a lot of our energy on? And so I'm going to ask everyone here to share that one issue that as you're looking to this next year and education policy for the 22-23 school year, what is that one important educational issue facing students in DC that everyone should have their eyes on? And how would including voices from students and families at the center of that issue really help as we're addressing it? And let's just go through in that same order. So Markaya, can we start with you first?
The one thing that I would say is definitely the mental health day for students. I think if you allow students to get on a panel where they can share their point of view of how they live, because everybody lives in a different path of life. So if they got to show you their point of view of what it's like being home or what it's like being a student at this moment, you will see a bigger point of view of why many of them need mental health days and why many of them need a mental health day where it's not you're still doing work or you still have to do something for school. It's actually a day that you could take to yourself. If it's just sleeping in, if it's just cleaning your room, if it's just taking a shower, if it's just small things, that would be like one big main thing.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And I love the fact that you mentioned that listening to students means you actually target the resources where they actually needed and not where you think they're needed. Thanks for that. Letitia, how about you?
You know, I struggle with picking one thing, and that's just because of my background and then understanding the system as a whole and how broken it is and where are the things that we need to do to fix it. I will definitely piggyback off of Ms. Mathis and say mental health is extremely important because we know that's the foundation of anyone's wellness, right? So no matter, I mean, mental health should be looked at as health, like just like you treat diabetes, you should treat your mental capacities as needed. And so I say that to say access to mental health needs in DC is extremely critical and crucial, but also having a strong accountability system around it so that these tiers do not leave people in the gaps and that there's not barriers that prevent them from getting the services and resources they need in or out of school time. We need dedicated funding. We need healthcare professionals that vary in their experience and in their expertise, areas of expertise. But then also, because of why I do what I do, I have to encourage programming and like community schooling, if you will, in a sense that we need to first assess the child's state of being and see where they are currently to figure out where we need to go. You really can't create a system that is improved without really acknowledging what are the barriers and the gaps and issues that we currently have, and then being able to incorporate the key stakeholders that are going to be a part of that process. So whether that's students and parents or experts in that field, whether again be mental health or specific programming, bringing those alliances together and really truly making an intention about making sure that our children are well. Just as adults, we spend most of our waking hours at work, they spend most of their waking hours at school. And I remember as a kid being happy and elated to go to school because that's where I got experiences. That's where I was learning to social. That's how I dealt with my first bully. That's how I, was able to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up. That's where I was able to learn and develop as a human being. And you can't do all of that at home with the little few hours you have, or the weekends or the summers or the breaks and so forth. So a lot of that happens at school, and there's so many barriers to a child being able to fully experience that development process when there's mental health issues, when there's homelessness, when there's food issues, where there's parents who are angry and woke up on the wrong side of bed that morning or every morning, and they don't know how to deal with that or where's a safe place to go. And I remember teachers throughout my educational career that still impact my thinking today or my life today, and has molded and shaped me and grown me to who I am. But more so, I say that we need programming around that. My teachers alone weren't the ones that did it. There was a support system for teachers as well. And it's important that we bring back some of the things that were a part of the curriculum that allowed us to express ourselves. Like Ms. Mathis mentioned, we had days where we talked about what mental health was, what wellness was, and we talked about the impact that those things had on our lives. And so I think mental health is extremely important, but bringing back certain parts of the curriculum that allow us to express ourselves and learn more about ourselves is also equally important. So for me, it's a crosshair between mental health resources and supports and training, and that social emotional learning that children need as well as families, but also the programming that surrounds and supports that allows providers and community partners to ensure access to in-demand programming and allow children to explore who they are and allow them the opportunity to be their best.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. It sounds like a very expansive view of what the school's place within the child's life, which it is. So it makes a lot of sense. Dr. Sutter, what do you think on that?
So I'm going to start to sound like a broken record, and I'm going to piggyback on what Ms. Mathis and Ms. Vincent said. One, because when we listen to students and parents, we tend to get it right more often. And two, because mental health is both the foundation and the surroundings of all the other things our students and their families are dealing with. So this afternoon, I'm going to testify about attendance at the DC Council. Well, I attend school when there's something there that brings me in, and or when I feel well enough to go. If I don't feel well enough to go, or there isn't something there that is making me feel safe, welcomed, and loved, I'm probably not going to go to school. So we can't disconnect issues of attendance from issues of mental health. When we think about academics, we know there's a reading crisis afoot right now, especially for our youngest children who did not get the usual reading instruction they may have gotten in the early years during the pandemic. If children don't feel safe and loved and secure and well, they're not going to be able to focus on their academics. So that's a critical issue to making sure we're attending to in order to handle the academic growth we know our students need to be making and continuing and even catching up on. And then I think too, when we think about our own adult lives and how we handle stress, how we handle pressure, if we aren't helping empower our young people with the tools to manage their own stress and tension with what makes them feel good. So I'm an athlete, I run. If I don't run, if I don't swim, I know I feel bad. When I do those things, I feel more equipped to handle stressful days and stressful weeks. That was something it took me a long time to learn, but helping our young people figure out what helps them manage their stress, what helps them feel connected. And I think to Ms. Vincent's point, I think we have a lot to do with programming on that front. When our students have the chance to participate in the arts, whether it's vocal music or visual arts or theater arts, they get outlets to talking about feelings, to playing with feelings, to thinking about feelings. And I think we can't miss that those kinds of opportunities to have a well-rounded education are also an essential component of thinking about our children's health and well-being. So I'm on the mental health train as well for all those reasons.
Great, fantastic. Thanks for all of that. How about you, Ms. Gerardo? What do you think?
So I mean, I totally agree with everything that's already been said, but I do feel like some, I shouldn't say more, but I just feel like there needs to remain a focus on teacher retention and also like, you know, what teachers are experiencing as far as mental health, stress management, things like that, because if we can't retain good teachers, then the kids suffer. And, you know, so I really do feel like making sure that we're retaining good teachers, that we're setting up systems that support them and allow them to be successful and focus on the, you know, focus on their jobs. I mean, a lot of our teachers are teaching in schools with homelessness, with, you know, high poverty rates and a lot of outside factors that trickle into the classroom and can make teaching difficult. But I think, you know, making sure that we're putting systems in place that making sure that teaching is still a rewarding profession and one that teachers can feel successful and they're actually able to accomplish the things that they came to accomplish.
Yep, absolutely. And I will say that this is the first time in my career that I'm hearing about mental health for teachers in the schools at the forefront. So I think there's a huge connection and I appreciate you bringing it up. And how about you, Ms. McDaniel? What do you think is that issue that needs to be front of mind for this next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of what has already been shared. So I'm not going to repeat everything that's already been said. However, I do think that it's like a both and situation that yes, there needs to be a broad, wide range of like community wraparound support for schools, and like it includes mental health, but it also includes what are those social services that make the school building like physically, literally a safe place. But also we saw this especially during, and this was true well before the pandemic, but the pandemic did like surface it in a way that brought it back to the forefront for a lot of people who are just not in the space, but that the school are sometimes the only place where students receive meals. And so it's also just thinking about what are those community wraparound support systems that schools can partner with and like have access to make sure that students and families and teachers have access to all of that. But the point about the both and it's also just like that can't be the only solution. DC has some of the highest incomes and most educated people in the country and also the least. And like we see that like very clearly. You can have a very visceral reaction when you're driving around the district. And so like what are also policies that as a charter sector, we are half of the public school community. Like how are we using that as a like how do we use that and to amplify the needs of all of our students, not just charter school students, but all of our students, to say that like it's on the schools and also the city. Like the schools can't do that alone. And that's in partnership with community orgs and different like agencies, but also like we need to also push our elected officials to also make that accessible too. There's just plenty of resources and a lot of wealth that like we just know is not being spent the most responsibly or the like in the most equitable way where it's getting to the people that we know it needs to. And so how do we invest as a school community in those programs, but then also how do we push our leadership to do the same so it's students are getting it, families are getting it, and teachers are getting it everywhere.
Yep. And I would imagine step one to that is finding out what students and families need. Like what are the priority partnerships we need, because that's exactly where they need those resources. Thank you all. I have a ton more questions, but I'm gonna turn it over to Kristen, because I know she's been monitoring some of the questions from the audience, and I want to give them a chance as well.
Yes, thank you guys so much. Really appreciated all of your thoughts and perspectives. So I have a few questions, but the first one comes from Josh Boots, and his question is, do or should we have a citywide survey for student and educator well-being to track changes, improvement, and identify bright spots to learn from?
Is this a comment where everybody piggybacks off, or it doesn't matter?
No.
I believe that everyone should do the survey. We started that at KIPP at the beginning of the year, where we would have teachers and staff do a survey about their mental health and how the pandemic was impacting them. And we came up with a system where students will write encouraging notes to teachers like, it's okay to be okay. It's okay not to be okay. It's okay to have hard days. And that was like a system that we built from teachers to students, to students to teachers. So I do believe that a survey brings more attentive and attention to the well-being of mental health of each person individually.
Thank you for sharing.
I'll jump on after Ms. Mathis. I think it's a great question, and I love that so many LEAs are doing these kinds of surveys. I know DC Public Schools also does their Panorama survey, which includes questions. One thing we've noticed at the state board is that sometimes people feel a little surveyed out. So I think one thing that would be great to do is to find out who is doing surveys, what are they learning from the surveys? So even if folks are unwilling to share the identifiable data from their surveys, will they share results from them so that we can figure out if there are gaps, and then maybe we could fill those in. Otherwise, I think it's important that we have this information, we track it, but I would hate for us to double it from a state level if we've got the information already, like Ms. Mathis said, from LEA level surveys.
Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that, Dr. Sutter. I just wanted to say this, that similarly, like PAVE, we do a lot of surveys and stuff as well. And there's a lot of individual groups, as Ms. Francesca mentioned earlier, that are doing a lot of things. And so instead of duplicating the data or, going in silo, we should learn how to collaborate more, which is why a part of our PAVE initiatives are about strategic planning, collaboration, community collaboration, bringing in resources. And just even last night, we talked to another advocacy group around like, how do we work with you instead of like against you, if you will, because there are a lot of resources and there are a lot of people who already put in a lot of time, effort, and funding into some of these matters. I think it would be very nice to bring those things together and see how we can collaborate and work together to make this change, because it's a huge load to lift. And one school, one system, one entity alone is not going to make an overnight success. But I think if we come together, bring our resources, bring our data, bring our findings, bring our potential solutions, then I think we'll have a better chance of really making it a much larger impact.
I also think, sorry, I also just like to underline _+1, whatever the like newest Zoom slang is, but like what's already been showed. I also just like want to emphasize like transparency with data, like to Ms. Vincent's point, like we ask lots of communities and they're largely the same for survey data all the time. And like we rarely share back like what we learned from it or what we were going to do with that information, or just like, here are the results, or here's what your survey input led to. Like it led to renovations at this school. We opened this community center, or we like are now, this building now has like a wheelchair ramp or whatever. It's just that we ask like the same community over and over and over again for their input, and either we don't listen to it or we forget, or whether it's, I want to like remain on the side of like assuming best intent that it's not intentional, but sometimes we know that it is. Like we don't follow up and just say like, here's what we use that data to do. Here is how you access this data. Here is how you like can play with it and like figure out where it went into policy and how that like the pathway of like from that survey to actually a bill being passed or something. And so yes, if we want to do another survey, but also like how are we thoughtful and intentional about doing that? And then how are we intentional about making sure that the communities we tapped for resources and solutions that they already know they need, how do we then follow back up and include them in the process moving forward?
Great, thank you for sharing. Carlo, I have a quick question for you. You had shared some key priorities that you had testified on earlier over the past few months. And so we had a supporter just ask, how did KIPP know that those 3 areas were priority for parents? How did you survey them?
It's a great question. So we, to my knowledge, did not survey parents. And this is where the forward-looking, creating this policy agenda is going to significantly change. Often these items come up on an agenda last minute and we're forced to be very responsive. And so at that point, we're able to do some level of outreach. So for example, as Vanessa mentioned, we convened parents from 2 schools on the safe routes. We got to hear from them. Those sessions helped us a lot to really rethink what she's going to be sharing with the council on Monday at the safe routes hearing. So sometimes we're able to do that, but the hope is, as we shift to this next stage over the spring, as we're talking to more and more families and students and teachers, we're able to gather a lot more ideas about the need early on and the solutions early on, and be prepared to bring those very proactively. On the other 2 items that I brought up before, we based our testimony primarily on the broader knowledge we had from talking to folks at the school site about their needs. So for example, we knew that there was a need for mental health supports expanded because our mental health practitioners are telling us that. And our principals, our school leaders are saying, hey, there's a lot of kids that really need more support. So that more of that than an individual survey, but the hope is to do a lot more of that moving forward as we're able to be more proactive.
Thanks for sharing. Well, I just have one final question. And so as we look ahead, I would love for each of you to share, how can supporters and attendees of today's conversation support and help amplify student and family voices? So how about we start with Micaiah and we go in order, and Carlo, you can close us out.
Your question was, how can supporters help this? If you could. I definitely would say using your voice can definitely have a bigger impact than just a few voices that are being said today, or encouraging others to use their voice when it comes to things that we need in the community, safe passages, not just to school, but from school, from the athletes that stay after from 12 or 6 p.m., going home. Also with the mental health days, because again, everyone's situation is different. Just using your voice, and if you know how much it impacts you, speak it up, because that definitely has a significant difference.
That was great, Ms. Mathis. I would kind of echo that, but I would go a step further also to say that I think sometimes those who are here obviously know that there's a need for advocacy, or already an advocate, or somewhere in that mix, right? So if you already understand the importance or the impact of parental engagement or family engagement or advocacy in any capacity, then make sure you're having that conversation with your peers. We are of our 5 closest people, right? So if everybody's 5 closest people is similar to you, and then similar to them, and then so it just trickles, right? And so in that, you would have a domino impact if every time you hear someone complaining, because I feel like complaints aren't just complaints. Sometimes people are complaining because they want a solution. They just maybe don't know how to get it or how to achieve it or what have you. And so they're there with an intent, even though it might come off wrong. But if you understand what the underlying thing is and what the need is, then you can share with them some of the resources, some of the avenues of advocacy. Because one of the things that I learned, even as a KIPP parent organizer, is a lot of parents want to be engaged. They want to be involved. They want to put their 2 cents in, but they don't have the time. They don't have the access. They don't know. They don't think they have the right words to say. They feel like they're not the right person for it, or whatever the case may be. Or a lot of times it's some barrier that's really not a barrier. And if you are able to kind of remove those barriers for them and let them know, you can write in, you can write a note, you can tell me, I'll go tell whoever I need to tell. These are the people you should go see. Well, there's this advocacy group over here. Share your knowledge and your experience, and let them know that every little bit counts. If it's a conversation with a principal, if it's another small group of parents getting together and then support and submit that to the staff or the leaders of that school or that system, or again, being a part of organizations like PAVE. Not that everybody wants to be a part of PAVE, but it is an avenue for you to let your voice be heard and amplified. Like that's what it's about, amplifying their voices and education, because everybody has an experience, good or bad. And if you are sharing the good things, then people can learn from that. If you're sharing the bad things, then we can learn from that too. And I think that if anyone is here that has an experience or is an advocate in any capacity, or knows resources or knows groups or individuals to go to, share that with your friends or your family, your fellow student bodies and so forth. Because again, I think a lot of it is a lack of knowledge and access, or they feel like there's a reason why they can't. And if you break down that reason, then you can potentially get more buy-in from the larger population.
Yeah, I love all of these ideas so far. I will say for supporters, ask places like KIPP DC, ask other organizations you support, how did you incorporate the voices of students and parents into this policy decision? How did you incorporate the voices of students and parents into this programmatic decision? And then listen for authenticity, because I think that's the thing that we miss sometimes in the engagement. I think Frankie made this point earlier about this notion of, what did we do with your survey data? It's not authentic if we ask input and we don't do anything with it. So how did we actually ask for this? And then what was done about it? And does it feel authentic? And if not, ask more probing questions. It's a great thing to be a supporter of an organization. You have a lot of power in that seat. And the more you ask these questions and the more you inquire about these things, the more likely you are to get responses about it and hopefully for change to happen. So ask those questions and then listen for the authenticity in the response.
I would just say along the lines of what Ms. Vinson was saying, where, finding ways to help students and parents just to see themselves as advocates, because to your point, like there are sometimes just barriers or, for whatever reason, they're busy or other life factors are keeping them from feeling like their voice has weight. And so really just finding ways to encourage kids and families to see themselves as advocates, that they can make a difference, that their experiences and their feedback really matters. Especially like with kids. Like I think with kids sometimes, they're just so used to going along with what adults decide for them and create for them. But, kids see, like letting kids know that, your voice is important too. What you're experiencing every day at school is important. So, but also I wanted to say, back to my other point about digging out those families that really typically don't participate. I think that is something intentional and strategic that needs to happen more often, because we are, so used to just, coming, whoever wants to sign up and come and voice their opinion. But I think, finding other ways to get more people out. Carlo and I, we tried to entice people to our feedback sessions with like goodie bags, and like we were like putting them together, putting cookies in there and all this stuff, and it did work. So on some level, but like, we thought that, having something tangible to say, like, we really want your input would just maybe draw a few more people out. And so just like finding ways like that to draw more people out and make them feel comfortable and welcomed in sharing their feedback and experiences.
I'll keep it short as not to repeat what everyone said. I also think that like just like focusing, I think if you have access to like whatever your sphere of influence is, if you have access to a really wide network, utilize that. If you have access to resources, specifically money, and can donate, then donate. Like if it's donating directly to the schools, donating to different like community-based organizations that are doing really great work, then donate to that. Show up to community events and like bring your network and bring partners into that work. Have these discussions like at your office and organizations. And then when you make those spaces available, whether it's like just helping facilitate other groups like doing their work, then get out of the way. Like, I think so much of it is that like people really want to feel it, and there's nothing wrong with it. People really want to feel like they're helping, and then we tend to like sort of get in the way of the work being done. So it's just like, if you can volunteer, if you can donate, if you can go to community events, if you can bring people to the events, like do all of that, and then also just be thoughtful about like how you're showing up in those spaces too. And also vote, please.
I'm just going to add that I would love for council offices and elected officials and the deputy mayor's office to get sick of people asking, how did you get input from students and families? Like, that's what I am going to start doing after listening to everyone today. That's just going to be a line in every meeting that I have from here on out, is going to be, how did you get input from students and families? And if everyone on this session all did that, eventually they're going to have no choice but to figure it out, because they're going to be asked all the time. And I think that would make a huge difference.
Great. Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and just want to extend so much gratitude to our speakers, and thank you to all of our supporters for attending today's conversation. So I just want to highlight a few ways for you all to stay connected. First, I hope you will join us for our next Engage on the Issues conversation on Friday, April 8th. Also on Friday, April 22nd, KIPP DC is excited to host our annual fundraiser, KIPP Prom, the school dance for grown-ups. It's going to be a fun evening, and all proceeds directly fund KIPP Forward, our alumni support program. And lastly, if you have other ideas, we would love to hear from you. So feel free to reach out to development@kippdc.org. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to connecting with you all soon.